Hello, this is video 49, I guess. No, it's video 49 for certain. And let's look at the make utility. M-A-K-E, all lowercase, U-T-I-L-I-T-Y, in Unix. Unix, Linux, as far as we're concerned, they're the same thing. Unix is a bigger family. Linux is just one particular flavor of Unix. Makefile, M-A-K-E-F-I-L-E. Now, I've used make up here, and I use makefile down here. A makefile is where you put all the information about a project in together in an actual file that looks like a source code file. And then the make utility is the command you run to actually reference your makefile and do all the stuff. A makefile has the name makefile. For emphasis, I'll put that in quotes here. All in lowercase. It's not camel cased. It doesn't start with capital. Has the name makefile. That's the only name it'll do. And you clean that up just a little. A makefile has the name makefile. It's case sensitive and contains line pairs, P-A-I-R-S, of the format, drum roll, dot, dot, dot. What format? Out front, there's what's called a target, T-A-R-G-E-T. You'll notice, can't talk and write at the same time. T-A-R-G-E-T in my pointing brackets, meaning that's a token. That's a symbol that you're going to have to replace with the real thing to make this into a real valid line in a makefile. Then a colon, an actual colon, that doesn't stand in for anything. And on the right hand of that is dependencies, D-E-P-E-N, D-E-N-C-I-E-S. There, that's the format of one line, target on the left, a single thing, and then a colon and a list, what will be a list of dependencies. And you don't type in /t down here, but you do have to tab over. /t, I don't know how to represent that. But you tab over rather than typing the spacebar so many times. It's looking for a tab key at the beginning of the second line of this pair of lines. Tab over, and then in pointing brackets here, instructions. Instructions, you can read that. For example, let me start over here. This one's getting kind of wide here. MP3.0. That's my target, followed by a colon. And I left space. Drop down at least some space here, because I'm going to write notes above this. I'm going to annotate this. You know what? I'm going to drop down even further. I'm not sure that's far enough down. MP3.0, colon. There's my target. What are the dependencies? mp3.cpp. And then a space and mp3.h. The contents of the object file mp3.0 depend on the contents of source file mp3.cpp and mp3.h. Oh no, where did that come from? That came from the dependency graph in the video before this one. So if you refer back to that picture and follow the arrows all the way back to the top from mp3.0, you'll see that it depends on these two source code files, meaning that if either one of those changes, then I need to update mp3.0. More specifically, the make utility needs to update mp3.0 because a change to one of these two files has now made that obsolete. Now put a tiny little /t there so you're not tempted to type it in. Tab over, how do I make a new version of mp3.0? Well, that handy dandy G++ command can do all kinds of things. Here's one of the things it can do. G++ space -c space mp3.cpp -o, lowercase o. That's not a zero, that's not a capital O, that's a lowercase o, mp3.0. Yeah, Unix commands look kind of cryptic sometimes, don't they? You know what? I'm going to switch color and talk about these things. Here's this thing over here. this target, dot, dot, dot. What about that target? This target depends on these two files. Dot, 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 depends on, I'll just say these two. And I explained that, I hope I did, in the dependency graph. The contents of the object file mp3.0, those are going to need to be updated. That's going to need to be changed if there's a change to either one of these. That's what the dependency means. The contents of that depends on the contents of that CPP file and that .h file. Now, G++, that's the compiler that we're using in the Linux lab and elsewhere. This is the compiler. It can also jumpstart the activities of the linker and loader, but in this case we're not doing that. The -C. Here's one thing that you'll get used to if you use Unix very much at all. The minus sign followed by a letter or maybe even occasionally a number, that's what's called an option. This is a particular option that I don't have room to describe here, so I'll drop down here. Option. I'm modifying what G++ would normally do by specifying an option. This option says compile, oops, oh, we'll put a quote up there. Here's a quote. Compile only. In other words, it's not even going to try to build an executable out of this. It's not. It can't. This is not, doesn't have a main program in it. mp3.cpp doesn't have a main program. It can't make a runnable program out of that. So I'm telling the compiler, don't even try to put this together into an executable. Just compile it. And there's the file that we want to compile. I don't know what I can say about that. This is one of the files up here. You'll notice this is the file that depended on it. The -O, that's another option. I'll drop down here. This will be the option layer down here. Option, double quotes, output to dot, dot, dot. That's what that option says. That's why it's a lowercase o. O for output. Output to, drum roll, this file. What a mess that was. Well, here's what's going to happen. When we run the make utility, and this is one of the line pairs, there will always be pairs of lines. This is one of the line pairs in our make file. The make utility will look and see if the date on this is more recent than that. In other words, if .cpp file for the MP3 program, the mp3.cpp file source code has changed more recently than it was compiled, or the header file, which it also depends on, was changed more recently than this was compiled. Oh no, I'm out of date. How do I fix it? What do I do? That's what the next line is for. That's the instructions, how to fix it. This says compile, but do not try to link and run. Compile mp3.cpp. Compile that source code into object code and put that object code in a file named mp3.o. It actually might go there by default. I don't know. But this is a standard way to write this. G++ -C, don't just compile, don't link. -O output to the name of the file I'm about to give you, mp3.o. If I wanted to put it into a different object file for whatever reason, then I could use anything here. It doesn't necessarily have to match the name of the source code file, but of course that would make good sense. If these are out of date, do this instruction and you'll be set, at least for the mp3.o. Now mp3.o is up to date. There'll have to be a separate pair of lines that says, you know what, if mp3.o changes, we're going to have to update the executable as well. That will also be in this make file. We got all that? That's one example. Here comes another example. I hope you got all that down. And I hope my handwriting is clear enough that you can read it. -C, -O, those are the big ones that might be prone to typos. But I'm going to leave the format up there and do another example. Example 2. Also going to be annotated somewhat. Over here, out front, PROG4. There it is. That's the name of our executable file. A colon. Oh, let's see. I didn't memorize that graph. What does that depend on? Oh, that's easy. That was those 3 object code files, and I can actually put them in any order. It doesn't really matter. But it depends on prog4.o. That was an object file. mp3.o. Another object code file. Who was the last one? Well, of course, the star of the show, rbt.o. Now, if I leave it just like that, then it will depend on those. Actually, I am going to leave it just like that. If I leave it just like that, then if any one of these changes, or 2 of them, or all 3 of them, then that means that the prog4 executable is out of date, and you've got to link it together. /t over to the instruction line to fix it if it's not up to date. Still G++, the all-purpose compiler and linker on our Unix system. G++, and look what I'm going to list here. prog4.o, mp3.o, and rbt.o. Can't spell RBT. rbt.o. And I could leave this line just like that. Except if I do that, we know what will happen, right? If we say G++ and just specify a list of files, it's going to make it into an executable file called a.out. And that might be okay, but I'm going to say, you know what? Put it at -o, put it at a file named prog4, because that's the one I'm trying to update. If the program 4 executable file is out of date, I want to make a new one. This line says this is how you make a new one. Now, lest you be disturbed, why isn't this .cpp across here the way we've always been doing it? Because this is only going to, let's see here. We only need to make new versions of the object file if their corresponding source code changed. So 2 out of 3 of these, 1 out of 3 of these, maybe several. That's 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. Some of these might already be up to date. There's no reason necessarily to go back and recompile absolutely everything that goes into making this executable file. So if any one of these 3 has changed, then rather than go back and compile everything using the CPPs, rather than going back and rebuilding the entire project, all we got to do is put together the object code here. How do I know the object code is up to date? Because I had other pairs of lines that said if the source code that this object code depends on has changed, update the object code file, the .old file. So by the time I get here, one of these might have changed, but they are all up to date because the makefile recursively goes through and updates anything that depends on obsolete source code or new source code. Does that make sense? The G++ command, it knows by looking at the extension, it knows that this object code and doesn't need to be compiled. It knows that that's object code and doesn't need to be compiled. It knows that that's object code and doesn't need to be compiled. So all the G++ command will do in this case is link them together into a big package, an executable file named prog4, and I make it go to that because that's a -o option, not a -0. Actually, I mean, this is just barely scratching the surface of what G++ can do. You could actually mix and match. I'm going to regret saying this. I'm going to say it anyway. G++ can tell by looking at the extension that this is object code. If I had had CPP here, then it would go back to the original source code, compile it into prog4.o before it continued on. If it's already object coded and we know it, then all we got to do is stick them together with the linker. And that's what this will do. This will invoke the linker. Okay, what else is there to say about that? The dates on your files, the modified dates, make a big difference. That's how it decides who's obsolete and who's not. I've already said that. What else have I not said? Oh, how to use this. How do we actually use it? And I will do a demo, but I'm going to write it up here for our reference anyway, in a color that I hope will write. That's not bad so far. To use. Put the makefile, makefile, all lowercase, Put the makefile in the same directory as your source code. Now, I'm assuming that we're smart enough to be a little bit organized in our directory folder setup, and we've got a separate folder for every different project. So your red black tree code, all of that's going to be in one folder together. Binary search tree code, that's in a different folder. Directed graph code, that's in a different folder. So each one of those folders is going to need its very own makefile based on the dependency graph for that particular project. So this makes it sound like it's unique. Put the makefile. It's actually the makefile for the project that you're working on right now, and all the files that it has. This one was for the red black tree. So put the makefile for the red black tree in the same directory as the source code for the red black tree stuff, the MP3 and the RBT and the prog4 and all that. Then, after you've done that, all you got to do at the command line is you type, without the quotes, but I'll put it in quotes, type make, like that, at the prompt, to build your project. Now, oddly, build might not be face value. Put make at the prompt, type in make to build your project. Build means specifically to do what we've been describing in the last two videos. In other words, go back and only do what you have to do. Cherry pick the ones that are obsolete, recompile those, relink, all that kind of stuff. That is building your project. It's not necessarily compiling everything. It's doing what needs to be done to bring your project up to date. If you wanted to just start fresh and get a brand new, completely brand spanking new suite of object code files and everything else, then that would be called rebuilding your project. And you've probably seen both of those options in drop-down menus in the IDE that you use. Building your project is just doing what you have to do to get it up to date. Rebuild project, or sometimes it even says rebuild all. That means more or less ignore the dependencies. Just go through and compile and link everything, for crying out loud. That's overkill. That's overkill, particularly on a really large project with a lot of files. How did I get squashed down here at the bottom of the board? What was here? Maybe I was going to annotate up there and I forgot to. Well, here's what I could say in a note up here. It recursively checks to see if these are up to date. And maybe MP3.0, oh no, it looks at that and realizes because of its dependencies that I had maybe up here and I erased, that's not up to date. Then that's what I mean by recursively. It will update this first before it even tries to update the prog4 executable. So it does go all the way through the dependency graph and check and make sure everything that needs to be updated is updated. All you got to do is make sure you've got the dependencies on one line and how to fix it on the next line. And you will get an example of a makefile that puts all this stuff together. And then to run, one last thing down here to run. Dot means current directory, slash prog4. That's the name of our executable. So instead of saying dot slash a.out, since we specified we wanted the executable to be called prog4, it would be dot slash prog4. That's it, or at least that's enough. That's not the whole thing. There's all kind of stuff to learn. Online. See you online.